this blank space in my bathroom that I wanted to transform into something beautiful. After some internet searching, I came across this idea for a rustic-looking window treatment. In this video, I'm going to show you the steps I took to complete this project, as well as some detailed information about the measurements that I used. So let's get started. The first thing you're going to want to do is get your measurements. Grab your measuring tape and measure across the window. Mine happened to be 47 inches across. Add an extra 4 inches on each side of the window for a total of 8 more inches to your total figure. Next, measure the approximate height that you want your curtains to cover. Mine was about 75 inches. Because this design is going to require you to put a knot in your curtains, you're gonna need at least an extra foot or two beyond that measurement. Then I went shopping for some curtains. These are the ones that I chose. Make sure that whichever curtains you pick, that they have a tab top design. I got the ones that measured 88 inches high in order to account for that extra fabric that I need. Once you decide which curtains you want to purchase, there are a couple of pieces of information that you're gonna need to pull from the specifications on your curtains. Specifically, you'll need to know how many tabs are at the top of the curtain so that you know how many hooks you need to buy. And you'll also need to know the height of each of those tabs so that you can use that information to determine the dimensions of the board that you need to purchase. I also went shopping for some hooks. Once you decide which type of hook you'd like to purchase, you'll need to know the height of those hooks. These hooks that I purchased have an approximate height of 2 inches. That added together with the tab height of the curtain put me at 6 inches. Knowing that information is going to help you determine the dimensions of the board that you need to purchase that runs across the top of your window. I added in 2 extra inches just so that the board would seem a little bit more substantial, and that's how I determined I would need a 1x8 by 55 inch board above the window opening. Here is a complete list of materials and tools that I used to complete this project. And any purchases that I made will be linked for you in the video description down below. So let's get started. I purchased a 1x8 by 6 foot board to hold up these window curtains. So the first thing I did was cut that board down to the 55 inches that I needed. Then I got to work sanding the board. I usually sand in a 2-part process. First, I'll take a very rough grit sandpaper and run over the entire board with it. And then I'll take a very fine grit sandpaper and go over the board one more time. It just helps make everything really nice and smooth. And then I grabbed my provincial wood stain and started making that board pretty. Be sure to wait the recommended amount of time for the stain to dry before moving on to a sealer. Sealers usually take a lot longer to dry. I'll usually let mine sit overnight before I start working with the board again. Next, I'm going to provide you with all of the information that I used to determine where to place and screw in the hooks on my board. The first hooks that I placed were the ones on the far left and right side of the board. I measured 2 inches in and 1.5 inches down for each of those hooks. Spend some time and make sure that your measurements are correct. When you're ready to screw in the screws, I recommend only screwing them in about halfway so that you can recheck your measurements and make sure things didn't shift while you were screwing in those screws. Once you're satisfied with the placement, go ahead and tighten up those screws. Repeat this same process for the hook on the other side of the board, and be sure to check your work with a level as you go along. The next hook that I screwed in was the one in the center. I found the exact center of the board by measuring halfway across the total distance, which for me was 27.5 inches. The rest of the hooks are a little easier from here on out to screw in. If you use a straight edge and run it from the first hook to the last hook, this will give you the proper 1.5 inch distance from the top of the board. I'm using my level as my straight edge. So all I really need to be concerned about is making sure that I get the proper placement in the exact center at 27.5 inches across the board. Once you get everything lined up, go ahead and screw in that hook. Now it's time to place the other 4 hooks. You'll need to know the spacing between each of these hooks before you can screw them in. To find this number, measure the distance between the first and the last hook, and then take that number divided by 6 in order to determine the spacing between each hook. Mine worked out to be 8.5 inches. Use your tape measure and the straight edge to place your hooks in the correct position, and then screw in those hooks. Be sure to double check their position using the straight edge and your measuring tape as you go along. And then repeat this process for all of the remaining hooks. Now it's time to install the board. I knew that I would not be able to hold the board in place while I measured where it was supposed to go. So I grabbed my measuring tape and marked the wall where I wanted the board to be placed, just so I wouldn't have to do both of those things simultaneously. I measured 4 inches to the left and to the right of the window opening and made a mark. I also measured 1 inch up from the window opening to indicate where the bottom of the board was going to rest. Next, I want the screw that's being drilled into the wall to be hidden underneath one of the hooks. So I removed the hooks at the edges of the board. Because the hook had already been drilled in, you can see where those original screws are going to be. I'll use those holes as a guide when I screw in the screw that goes directly into the wall, and then that screw will be hidden underneath the hook. Then I took out my handy dandy stud finder and did a quick check just to make sure that there was a stud behind the wall that I would be drilling into. If not, that wouldn't have been a very big deal. I just would have grabbed some wall anchors and put them in where I needed them. Next, I grabbed a helper to help me hold the board in place while I screwed it into the wall. Be sure to line the board up with the markings that you made on the wall, and then screw it in. We had to change sides real quick. I got ready to screw in the other side of the board, and my helper did a quick check with a level to make sure that everything was good to go, and then I screwed in the second screw. Then I screwed the hooks back into their positions using their original drill marks as a guide. And somehow I knocked the level off the board while I was working. Glad that thing didn't hit me in the head. And now for the fun part. Hang that curtain on the hooks. Remember, this requires 2, so you're going to hang one and then go back through and hang the second one. This is the hardest part for me. I'm a math teacher, and so it's hard for me to not do things that are incredibly precise. And putting the knots in these curtains is definitely one of those things. It took me forever to figure out where I wanted the knot to be in terms of height-wise. It also took me forever to get them to match up equally on both the left and the right sides. But if you're like me, don't despair, just keep fiddling with it until you get the look that you want. The very last thing that I did was use command hooks to keep the knots on the sides of the walls. I used command hooks that were rated for bathrooms. I guess they're supposed to stay sticky even if they get wet. The hooks hide really well behind the knots, and so don't worry about them showing through the curtain. Also, when you're placing the command hook on the wall, put it a little higher than you want the knot to go, just because the knot has to rest on the hook, and so you want it just slightly higher than where that knot will be resting. And here is the finished project. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to my channel. Happy DIYing!